Well, hello, and welcome to this year's RCPA annual conference. It's such a pleasure to be back with you again this year. I hope all of you are staying well and sane in these crazy times. We're going to talk today about some leadership topics that are near and dear to my heart. You see, I believe that we have no higher calling in our professional lives than to lead others. And for me, that means that we lead ourselves first. We're going to talk about that in a little bit of detail today, but more so, we're going to get into how we can be a leader worth following. How can we be the kind of person where our people want to follow us? They want to embrace our vision. Now, leadership's hard, quite honestly. If you've been in a leadership role, either professionally or perhaps in a nonprofit setting, you know leading others is difficult. In fact, go ahead and raise your hand or throw in the chat box if you've goofed in your leadership role. I know I have. And so I want you to think about the fact that we all mess up. The best leaders mess up. No matter who you think of when it comes to being a great leader, they mess up. So what we're going to look at today is how can we bring our full selves to the table every day for our people. Because the bottom line is this: the stakes are really high in leading others today. There's a lot more competition in the marketplace. We've got slimmer margins. We're asking more of our people. You throw in the pandemic on top of all of that, and our jobs have gotten a lot harder. Our people need us now more than ever. And so today, we're going to talk about how we can be leaders worth following. It's been said that really smart people learn from their mistakes. But I want you to think about what could happen if you could also learn from others' mistakes. What would that be like if you could learn from others' mistakes? Would that make you better? Would you be better off being able to analyze the goof-ups of other people? Or would it be even smarter if you could learn from other people's successes? I'm a big John Maxwell disciple. I'm sure many of you have read his books. In fact, if you've read one of his books, go ahead and throw the last one that you read, the title of that, in the chat box. I'm really curious to see what titles are out there that folks are reading. Of course, his most recent one at the time of this taping is Leader Shift, but he's written dozens and dozens upon great books. And I love this insight from him. Because so often we tell ourselves we have to learn from our mistakes, or we can look at others and learn from others' mistakes. But what John tells us is, how about we learn from other successes? Can we emulate other people? In fact, in one of his books, he talks about this concept of, unless you have a real glaring weakness, of course you'd want to work on that. But let's say you've got a bunch of minor weaknesses, but you've got some great strengths. Maybe we need to focus on our strengths. How can we make our strengths even better? And let me give you an example of that. I enjoy golfing. And so with golf, if those of you in the audience that are golfers, it's a tough sport to master. One club works one day, another club works another day, and mayhem usually ensues in between. And so I can master one club on one round, and one club is weak, so I work on that club, and then I work that one out and another one. So it's like you're chasing your tail, right? But what if we simply embraced our strengths for a change? What would happen if we took the best things that we do and we made them even better? I want you to think about that concept today. Because at the end of our time together, we've got about an hour together today, I'm going to show you how you can be the leader worth following. I'm going to show you how you can get from the island you're on now with your leadership skill set and get over to the island you want to be on. Maybe you're a budding leader and you are trying to figure this all out, or maybe you're a seasoned leader who just wants to improve. Either way, I'm going to get you off the island you're on. Call it Pain Island if you want, and we're going to get over to Pleasure Island together. We're going to get over on that island where we are a better version of ourselves. And I want you to think about one other thing as we're going through our session today. Maybe there's things I'm going to mention. You're going to say, Ed, I've heard that before. Well, why are you hearing it again right now? What is the universe trying to tell you? A few months back, actually, it was my very last live talk that I had given, and had a lady in it, and she had heard my topic, the same topic at a previous conference. She said, Ed, if I tune out, I don't want you to think I'm being rude. I heard you at the conference. That's why you're here today with our association. And she says, so I may try and catch up on some emails. And I smiled and said, that's okay. At the end of the session, she came back up to me. She said, Ed, I didn't get any emails done. She said, I was hearing things for the first time. So I want you to stay engaged. I want you to use the chat room to ask questions and see if we can't make this the best session that you've attended today. So what are we going to look at today? We're going to look at this concept that no one gets to the top alone. Nobody. Doesn't happen, can't happen. We all need each other's help. We're going to look at that. I already mentioned we're going to look at how we lead ourselves well. We're going to look at how do we handle criticism? And why is it that we put so much focus on criticism that we get? I was just chatting with the wife of a good friend of mine, and she said to me, you know, Ed, when it comes to criticism, I heard something a long time ago that was, don't accept criticism from someone who you also wouldn't ask for advice. And I went, wow. It is so simple. Forgive me if you've heard that before, but when I heard that, I thought, man, it's so simple. Yet again, we focus on the negatives. We're going to dig into that. We're going to figure out how we get into that leadership zone. How do we get real with our people? And most importantly, how do we keep learning? I realized a couple years ago that I spend so much time developing content for conferences that I speak at and for clients and delivering it, that I wasn't taking care of my own personal leadership development. And so I've made it over the last 1.5 to 2 years a focus of mine to do more for me. How can I be a better version of me? Because that helps me to be better for my customers. We're going to take a look at that concept. We're going to wrap up with why people quit people. You've probably heard this before, that people don't quit companies, they quit their supervisor. We're going to look at why that is. And if that's happening to you, we're going to stop that. And finally, we're going to look at your leadership legacy and try and figure out what kind of legacy do you want to leave with people? Who is it that you want to be for them? So let's think about this idea of nobody ever getting to the top alone. You've got a great picture here, some folks on a mountain climb. Think about expeditions to Everest. It takes like a whole village to make that happen, right? You see the trekkers going up the mountain, and there's a whole line of them going up the mountain. They're all strapped together. They all have certain responsibilities. Some are carrying gear, some are guides, some are leaders. Some are cooks, some are medics. I mean, you name it, right? One person cannot climb Mount Everest. It is physically impossible for that person to survive the journey on their own. They need a village to make it happen. And so if we take that one step further and you think about what it's taken you to get you where you are today, I bet if you're really honest with yourself, you'll find that other people have helped you along the way. Sure, maybe you're a self-made person, and that's cool, but even self-made people had folks around them who advised them, gave them advice in areas they weren't strong on. You know, I think as a business owner, who surrounds me? I've got a great marketing person. I've got a great administrative person. I've got a great accountant. I've got a great attorney. I can't be all of those things. So I find people on my team to surround me with to help me get to where I'm going with my personal goals and my business goals. We all need others. And so what happens is, as leaders, one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of leaders make is we get to the top of the hill. Like, we're this guy way up top here, right? On the top of that mountain. We go like, yeah, I'm king of the hill, right? We played it as kids. We played king of the hill. What did you do when you got to the top of the hill, right? Other kids would rush up at you and you'd push them down, you'd kick them. You'd do anything you could to keep them from unseating you at the top of the hill. And unfortunately, as fun as that kid game was, it's not very smart from a business sense. You see, our job as leaders is to actually pull other people up with us, to draw them up. And so I want you to think about something. Physically do this as you're watching this video, okay? I want you to imagine that someone is sort of below you, they're coming up the hill, and you push them. You try to push them away, push them down, okay? What happens? You actually see my head almost leave the screen. Why? Because I'm lowering myself as I'm attempting to push someone else lower. You see, when we don't help others get to the peak with us, we diminish ourselves. Think about when you're pulling someone up, you actually get more erect. You stand straighter because you're pulling. You're in a more powerful position. Pull people along with you on the journey. As leaders, we do that through our vision, helping our people to see what we see, why we see it, why we have to go there. It's so incredibly critical for us. And so what happens is leaders get to the top and they feel lonely. They're standing here like this gentleman and they say, gosh, this is fun. I got a great view up here, but there's no one with me to share it. And so one of the things that we have to think about is this idea of positional thinking, that I'm the leader. I've got director in my job title, or vice president, or manager, or supervisor, whatever it happens to be for you. And that because of this idea that I have this position, I'm either better than someone else, or I'm in a position to not ask for help or assistance. And yet nothing could be further from the truth. Think about any leader that you admire, whether it's someone from history, someone in present day, it doesn't matter whether it's politics, business, your faith tradition, whatever it happens to be. Think of a leader. And I want you to think about what makes them so great as a leader. I'll tell you from the reading that I've done on leadership and reading biographies of some of our great military, political leaders and so on over the years, there's one thing that's true about all of these great people. And that's that they surrounded themselves with people smarter than them in specific areas. Have we done that? Have we surrounded ourselves with people that complete us as a leader? Or do we find that person who we know is smarter than us and we keep them at arm's length because we're terrified of losing our position? We can't be a leader worth following. In fact, I would argue you can't be a good leader at all if you're keeping everyone at arm's length because of your own insecurities. Leaders can't have overt insecurities like that. I'm not saying we don't all have insecurities, because we do. We're human beings. But to be that insecure in your position, you're asking for a downfall. And so when I think about being a leader, one of the things that I have to constantly remember myself is we are in the people business. That's what we're charged with as leaders. We're no longer adding 2 + 2 or making the widgets or whatever the tactical things were that we were in charge of. We're now in charge of motivating people. First and foremost, that is our job as leaders, number one. And I love to debate people on this. People say, well, Ed, leaders got to be a strategic visionary, got to write a strategic plan, and has to meet with customers, has to do all these things. It's all people business. If I put a great strategic plan together, I've probably had a team of people to help me with that, because one person can't do a strategic plan. And if I'm out as the leader and I'm interacting with my customers and my vendors, well, that's people. So really what we're talking about here is being significant. having a significant role in the minds and the eyes and the lives of our people. We have to avoid this idea that because I've got that leadership position, that leadership title, that I'm better than my people, or that I use that to persuade them to do certain things. Good leaders get people to buy into their vision and come along for the ride. And there have been examples through the years of truly horrible people being good leaders. You know, one that obviously comes to mind is Hitler. He had a lot of followers. He got a lot of people to do a lot of really bad things. But by the definition of a leader, people were following him. Yes, some out of fear, but some out of pure loyalty and a buy-in to his vision. So we have to be careful with our leadership position, that it's not just about us, and that we are attempting to do something truly great in our organizations. Because one is too small a number to achieve anything. We can't. In fact, I've coached more leaders who are on the verge of burnout because they're trying to do it all themselves. And they forget that one of their roles as leaders is to equip the people around them. Now, that's another topic for another time. But that's a gold nugget I want you to take away today. It's one of many of the gold nuggets you're going to get. Your job as a leader is to equip those around you, develop them, help them be the best person they can be. And they will help make you the best leader you can be, which in turn makes your organization the best it can be. Now, for as hard as it is to lead others, I believe one of the most challenging people to lead is always ourselves. Why do I say that? Well, I find it's a full-time job. Because what often happens with us is this. I want you to think about this. When's the last time someone in your organization was tasked with doing something and it didn't work, it didn't fall through, they didn't come through for you? And instead of judging them on their intentions, their attempt to do good, we judge them on the fact that they didn't cut it. They didn't get the project in on time or on budget or whatever the case might be. And yet, how do we view ourselves when we don't hit our goals? Do we allow ourselves off the hook? Well, I meant to do it, but this happened. Well, I was trying, but this event took precedence. Do we let ourselves off the hook for the very things that we hold our people accountable for? I'm willing to bet if you do a really good search of your heart, you'll find it's true. I will admit it's true for me. That's what makes us the hardest person to lead. We have to hold ourselves to the same high level of standards and accountability that we hold our people to. Maybe that means we need to get a mentor of our own or a coach of our own. Maybe we need to be in a CEO group or a leadership group based on your level in the organization that will help you bounce ideas off of each other in a safe environment. But this also comes back to the continual learning. What are the kinks in your armor? What are the skill sets that maybe you're still missing and that you need to work on to get better? Who's going to help you with that? Who's going to help you to be accountable to yourself for making those things happen? Because if we don't lead ourselves well, if we don't make sure that we are the best that we can be, we can't possibly be the best we can be for our people. So what are some keys to leading yourself? I believe there are 4 of them. And the first, I listed up there first because I think it is the hardest one and it's the one we need to work on the most: self-discipline. Do we do what we say we are going to do? even if no one knows what we're going to do except ourselves. You see, that's where the discipline comes in. Again, go back to my thought that sometimes we judge others by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. We need to develop a self-discipline to make sure that the things we're holding ourselves accountable to, we're also, holding others accountable to as well. And that's why seeking accountability is so critical. It's so critical for us as leaders because we can be lonely at the top. We can feel lonely at the top. And we cure that loneliness by having a network around us. Again, whether that's finding that outside of work or a mentor in the workplace or a coworker that we can work on our own accountability. Because self-discipline is the highest form of leadership. And so if we lack self-discipline, that usually comes from a lack of holding ourselves accountable. It's absolutely critical. It's funny. There's an old saying that people who lead themselves really well know a secret. And that secret is that they can't trust themselves. And maybe that's true for you. I don't know. But I'm willing to bet that in this time of a lot of remote work, you have had to be perhaps more disciplined than at the office. When there's loads of laundry to be done or kids to be schooled or vacuuming or whatever other household chores. Maybe it's you want to watch the game show on TV. I don't know. But in this day and age that we're in right now, it's hard to be truly self-disciplined when we're not going into an office perhaps on a regular basis, where the boss or our coworkers see us. And so we have to make sure that we prove our ability to lead others through how we lead ourselves. I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but it's so, so critical. Make sure you are living up to your own high standards. And that leads me to followership. If you think about the fact that we're on a lifelong learning journey, that means there's always someone who knows something we don't. Seek those people out. Find a mentor. Doesn't have to be a professional relationship like an executive coach, but find a mentor. Learn from that person. Learn to follow others. Read, digest information. Now, this is where I lose people because they'll tell me, Ed, I don't have time to read. Are you kidding me? Okay. Do yourself a favor and think about if you're in that boat. I don't have any time to read. I can't. Okay. How much time do you spend on social media? How much time do you catch up on reality TV? How much time do you spend in the car every day? Now that's very different, right? You say, what does that have to do with it? You can't read in the car. But you can do audiobooks. You could listen to a podcast. You could take your lunch break, read a couple of pages in a book, or catch a podcast on your lunch break. Oh, but Ed, I don't really get a lunch break. Okay, we just talked about self-discipline. There has to be time for you in your day, whether that's for your own mental sanity and it's meditating or exercising, or it's self-development. If you're going to be a good leader, that's part of your discipline, is to make that time for you. I make time for me every day, one in the form of some type of exercise, but also in the form of some type of self-development. I don't do well with audiobooks that are business-based, so I read them. I take some time while I'm eating my lunch. I don't look at the computer, don't check emails. I try and knock out a chapter in a book. And I really try and knock it out, not just to breeze through it, but I have a highlighter in hand and I dog-ear the pages, things that I really want to digest. Because I've realized that was lacking in my own self-discipline. So I had to hold myself accountable to make that happen. That's my challenge for you today. It's your first piece of homework. How can you hold yourself accountable to your own self-development as a leader? What can you do with some of the information we're learning today to move forward on it? What can you do to read, or again, let's do a podcast, whatever, watch a video on something that's of interest to you that can help you be a better leader, help you complete who you are. Because here's the thing, the choices we make in critical moments make who we are. Now, those critical moments are not always the big things that, say, a political leader may have to deal with, but it could be the simple things. The simple things like, oh, I'm going to eat my sandwich now at lunch, and what's the harm of checking Facebook? It'll be a great diversion. Okay, maybe it is. But wouldn't a great podcast on leadership or business also be a diversion for you? Get your mind thinking in a different way? Because those kinds of choices inform others about who we are. And our people see this. Our coworkers see this. Ultimately, our job as leaders is to help solve problems. That's it. I talk to managers all the time who say they're working so hard to solve their workplace problems so they can kick back and relax. I have literally had numerous people over my career tell me that. And I laugh at that all the time, because what does it mean when the problems stop? I'll just pause there. What does it mean? Go ahead and throw the answer in the chat box. When the problems stop in your job, what happens? There's no need for your job anymore. That's why we get paid as professionals, to solve problems. It always comes down to that. And so how we act in these critical moments, how we choose to spend our time in those critical moments, help define us. And it comes back to that idea of self-accountability and self-leadership. If we really want to influence others, we've got to help them solve their problems. It goes back to not being lonely on that mountaintop that we saw a couple of slides back. Our job as leaders is to equip others. We don't have to solve their problems for them. In fact, I would argue we should not solve their problems for them. You've always heard I know you've heard the adage, give a man a fish and he eats for a day, okay? But teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. You hear the difference there? It's huge. One creates a handout where the man is going to keep coming back to you every day saying, where's my fish? I need to eat today. One, you've helped him solve his problem. This, I believe, is one of the biggest mistakes we make as leaders in our organizations. We hand people their fish every day by solving their problems for them, instead of giving them the skills, equipping them with the things they need to be able to solve those problems on their own, and then giving them the authority to solve those problems on their own. I'm coaching a human resources executive right now who's burning out. And the CEO of their organization brought me in to work with her because they value her. But she is becoming less and less results oriented. She's not driving the initiatives like she used to. And one of the things we're finding as we're going down her leadership journey is that she's not done a good job of equipping others. She's been trying to take too much on herself. And that's a problem. And so we need to equip others. We need to help them solve their own problems. Now, I love this next quote. It's from Aristotle. So we're going way back, okay? Criticism is something you can easily avoid. Say nothing, do nothing, be nothing. You won't get an ounce of criticism. Now, I started the session out today talking a little bit about criticism, and maybe not taking criticism from someone who you wouldn't also ask for some good advice from. At the same time, I want you to remember there are always going to be critics, okay? Give them the time they deserve. This much, very little. If you're like me, that's hard. It's hard. I speak a lot at conferences, and that means I get reviews. And I've been very fortunate that I guess people like what I had to say because I'll get 99% good reviews. And there's always one or two people say, oh, he was terrible, he was this, he was that. And I tend to focus on that. There's 300 people in the room, and I focus on the 2 who said, oh, yeah, you were cruddy. Okay, if you're like me, maybe you have that tendency. Honestly, it's destructive. It's something I'm working very, very hard on to fix because we can't please everybody. You know this, I know this, and yet sometimes we still try to do it. So I want you to think about how you handle criticism right now. Now, I realize the answer to that question may come based on who the criticism is coming from. But how do you handle it now? Do you get defensive? Do you fight back? Do you crawl in a hole and hide? Or do you look at it and say, okay, what can I learn from this? That's the higher emotional intelligence in all of this. When criticism comes our way and it's well-founded and well-intentioned, it's time to listen and say, okay, I messed up. What else can I do to make it better? And so here's the challenge for us as leaders. There's always a target on our back, always. If you're in an organization with a lot of competitive people, there's probably someone who wants your job. Maybe they'd be better at it than you, maybe not, who knows, right? But there's always someone who's going to look out for an opportunity to undermine us. Those situations are extremely hard to handle. I coached a bank CEO on a very similar situation where her CFO was actively undermining her. And it was because the CFO felt she could do a better job as CEO. Now, that's a personnel issue, obviously, that we had to work through. But it's also an issue for the CEO because of her reaction to it and her going into defense mode and fight or flight mode, which was a challenge for her. And I don't have time to get into things in any greater detail than that, except to say that a lot of the criticism being thrown her way was out of jealousy on the part of the CFO. And so as part of my coaching with this CEO, I helped her to realize that this criticism was not coming from a place of well-meaning and well-intention. It was coming from a mean spirit and the urge to get the board of directors to see that maybe she's not the best CEO for the organization. And so I hope you're not dealing with something like that. That's certainly something that's not fun, but it can help shape us as leaders. It can bring us out better if we're forced to confront those types of issues in our workplace. Here's the thing with leadership. We all can only change for the better when we're open to improvement. And so that's why I think that self-development and self-leadership are so critical. I think it's why learning to hold ourselves accountable is critical. I think it's why equipping others is so critical. We have to look for the kinks in our armor. One of the best ways is to ask the people that surround you and that you are trusted by or that you trust, to ask them what you can do to improve. Now, that's vulnerable, right? That's vulnerability at its best. And you may not be comfortable with that. But a real leader asks what more they can do for their people. I think back to Kennedy's quote, ask not what you can do for ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? We could spin that around and say, ask not for what my people can do for me because I'm the leader. What can I do for my people? That's why we exist. One of the things that we can do for our people is to continually work on ourselves, to be open for improvement. So when criticism is thrown our way, or someone expresses disappointment in decisions that we made, I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions. And these are critical. Please write these down. Who criticized me? So that goes back, is it criticism from a wise person or someone who's mean-spirited? The mean-spirited, get rid of them. Now, there might be just a little bit of truth in it, but don't spend a lot of time with mean-spirited criticism. How was the criticism given? Was it given in a tone of caring and openness and trust? Because that's probably some criticism that you need to hear. I remember one of the best managers I ever worked for. I still remember the discussion to this day, and it happened 30 years ago. The way he approached me to talk about a situation that I handled poorly made all the difference. Now, people will say, well, that's not really criticism. Well, it sure as heck wasn't building me up. I mean, he had to have a corrective action discussion with me. So call it whatever you want. It was coming from a place of the heart, from someone that I trusted. He was trying to help me become a better me. And that leads me to the third question you have to ask yourself, which is, why is this person giving me this criticism right now? If it's coming from a place of caring and trust, then we need to hear it. Because ultimately, how we hear it, if we hear it, is what's going to determine if we, in fact, grow from it, or just chalk them and say, I don't have to listen to that. I'm the leader. I'm top dog. You see, that's what gets us in trouble when we develop that type of attitude. Now, attitude plays a bigger role in our professional lives than what most people think. In fact, I mentioned the HR person that I'm currently coaching, and she has said to me, Ed, my attitude is suffering. She's been with her employer for 18 years. She's come up through the ranks. She's the head of HR. And she says, Ed, I don't have the fire in me anymore. And I need to find that fire, because I know that that's part of why I'm burning out. I don't have the fire anymore. So what we're working on is trying to discover her passion. Where did her passion go? As a leader, we have to be passionate. You've seen this saying before: love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. And you're probably going, oh, spare me, Ed. It's called work for a reason. Work's a 4-letter word, okay? But I will challenge you with this. Your path has led you to where you are right now. The choices you've made in the past, the educational opportunities you've taken or not, the choices you've made in terms of how you've worked with others or not, all of those things have led you down a path to put you right where you are right now. And so I don't believe it is anyone else's job other than our own, through our own self-leadership, to develop our passion. And that's where this quote really comes from. Truly loving what you do. Is it still going to be work? Yeah, I guess I'll admit it's still going to be work, okay? But the reality is that if we're passionate about things, man, that's the key to finding our potential. Find what you're passionate about in your work. Really take a look at your area of responsibility. Find out what are the mundane things that just suck the life out of you, and find the parts of your job that it makes you get out of bed every day. How can we adjust some of those things to do more of what we're passionate about? And here's where things really start to come together for us. You see those mundane things that maybe we really don't enjoy doing? There's someone else in your workplace for whom those things are a passion. For instance, I was coaching a manager who said, Ed, I love project management. I love to see a project through from beginning to end. I really don't like the strategic stuff. I don't like sitting in our strategic planning sessions. I don't have that creative ability to see into the future. It's just not me. And I've tried. And I said, okay. And in talking with the CEO of that organization, when I was reporting in about how the coaching was going, I said, okay, this person needs to be in a project manager role within her department. You have lots of projects going on. The CEO said, I would have never thought about this. I said, make her a manager, give her all of the projects that are going on, and that's her job. To pull the resources together to make those things happen, see them through. You will ignite the fire within her. You're going to get better results because you're not going to be draining her with the higher level stuff. And he said to me, well, she always wanted to rise up through the organization and try the higher level stuff. And I said, she did. And now she's realizing that's out of her comfort zone. It's not what drives her anymore. And again, it was causing her performance to suffer. And so we have to find our passion in our work to make sure that that energy that comes from passion bleeds out into our people, because the opposite is deadly. If you show up without passion to work, you're not going to be motivating to your people. And it's going to result not only in increased turnover, but guarantee you lower productivity from your staff and much lower energy levels than your customers deserve. Here's why this is so critical. I love this quote from Jack Welch. The world really does belong to passionate, driven leaders. People who want to make a difference in the lives of the people that they're responsible for. So our job as leaders really is to energize those around us. Now, I'm self-employed. I've got my team of folks that work with me. Many of them are self-employed though too, but we energize each other. I've been a softball coach for a number of years now for girls' youth leagues. And I see that, yes, teaching the basics of the game to these young girls, yes, that's critical. But what I've heard from the parents more often is, Ed, they love the energy you bring to the field. You work them hard. We see you working them and working them and working them, and yet they walk off that field with smiles on their faces and they're not discouraged. And I look at that and that makes me smile, because that means that I've done exactly what Mr. Welch is saying here. I'm passionate about teaching these young girls this game, and it's coming through in their energy levels, and they're wanting to learn the game and wanting to give it their all, to the point that we can do our running drills and they say, Coach Ed, can we run some more? Now, granted, they're 12 years old. They got endless amounts of energy, but it's coming through. That energy that I'm bringing to something I'm passionate about is coming through. And so we have to find as leaders our passion, because if we can find that and we're energized, the people around us can't help but be energized. They gravitate to it. Think about the people you like to associate with. I'm pretty sure you're going to find those are passionate and driven individuals. We're no different than the folks that we're leading. So when you think about the things that you're trying to do for your people, think about the things you want done for you. And I bet you'll be willing to find the answers to your questions and the path to move forward. You guys ready to get real now? It's time to get real. We've been talking some theory. Let's get real. All right. So one of the pitfalls is that leaders don't often face reality. Okay. They have this vision, because that's what we're supposed to be as leaders, be the visionary. And we forget sometimes that there's the reality in the way. And leaders will try and drive their people through to a vision that does not pair up with reality. I'll give you an example. Was dealing with a performance management changeover for an organization that had a pretty big call center. And they really wanted to get to this idea of one call resolution, right? So where you call and you don't have to tell your story 10 times to 10 different people. You tell your story once, that one person gets you through to resolution. I mean, what a wonderful concept. Wouldn't we all like that concept? Here is the problem though. That's the vision they put out there. The reality was that the way they were paying their customer telephone support people was, sure, they had their base rate of pay, but they were given bonuses based on how many calls they took in an hour. So it was in their best interest to get you on and off the phone as quickly as possible, because that's what was hitting their pockets. That's vision and reality not pairing up. That's a problem, okay? So it's our job as leaders to not just define the vision, but to define reality as well. Where are we currently? What are the things we're going to have to change in order to meet the vision? People have to understand the vision, but they also got to understand that our head's not in the clouds with that vision either. That in fact, we understand the current reality, the challenges facing us, and how do we get to where we need to be. Very good friend of mine's in banking. And he recently, I guess about a year ago, left his position. And it was all based on this concept of reality. You see, he ran a small branch in a part of town that was not very wealthy. And the bulk of the folks banking at his branch were tenants. In other words, they did not own their own property. They were lower level income. Many of them had credit issues. Now, the reason I give you all that detail is that typically, if you have someone who's renting, well, they don't own a home, right? So you can't offer them a home equity line of credit, or you can't offer them to refi their mortgage. If their credit's a problem, they're certainly not going to maybe be eligible for credit cards. And on the lower end of the income spectrum, they're not going to be buying high-end cars if they can even afford a basic car. And so what my friend was struggling with running this branch was he couldn't meet the goals that the company had set for him, because they didn't take into account the demographics of the folks that branch was serving. They simply said, okay, here are our goals for the county, breaking that out by branch, here you go. And he did his research. He brought that back to management, explained to them, look, we've got to come up with a different way to calculate my goals, because these goals are not grounded in reality. They didn't want to hear it. That's a problem. We cannot ignore the reality of our situations to get to our vision. We have to acknowledge reality to make sure that we can hit our vision. See how that works? So if we're going to really pair up reality with our vision, one of the first things we have to do is admit our weaknesses. Now, I'm not saying you need to have a big whiteboard in your office that says, I stink at doing this, okay? Not what I'm saying. But it's okay to say you made a mistake. It's okay to say you're wrong. Your people know it. You know it. It's not a big deal. It's okay to say you're sorry. Tell them that. People love other realistic people. Again, who do you hang out with? Do you hang out with someone who's not self-aware, who is not doesn't ground their own actions in reality, doesn't admit they have any weaknesses? I mean, we all know people like this. They're self-centered, they're egotistical, they dominate conversations, they think that what they have to say is more important than everybody else's. These are personality flaws, and people don't gravitate to those types of leaders. They gravitate to honest people, which means that we have to ask for honesty from others. Develop meaningful relationships with your coworkers. Have some folks and that you trust enough to say, hey, can you give me some feedback on me? This is the exercise that all of my coaching clients absolutely despise. We end up talking for a good portion of their coaching time with me on relationships, because relationships are the key to our success. And one of their pieces of homework throughout the coaching is always to select a few people with whom they don't have good relationships, but have to have good relationships to be successful, and to work on those relationships. And one of the first things is to sit down and say, hey, let's talk about where we are how maybe I'm not serving you properly or whatever the case might be. That's hard to do, okay? But good leaders will do it. Good leaders will have people around them that they can ask, hey, what do you think about? I have people like that for me. Being a sole proprietor can be lonely. And you can feel like you're standing on top of that mountain with no one around. So I have some people that I can reach out to and say, I'm struggling. Can I run something past you? This is how I think I want to respond to this situation, but I'm not convinced it's the best way. I've got people like that. We all need those kind of people. So I mentioned earlier about finding a mentor, but it could be a coworker that you trust, that you've got a solid relationship with. Ask them for some feedback on your weaknesses. Because let me tell you something, your team knows your weaknesses. You may think that you've hidden them well. I guarantee you, if I walked in and talked to your team, hey, what's her weaknesses? They'd tell me. And then I'd come back to you and you'd probably admit, yep, those are my weaknesses. So there's nothing wrong with admitting them. What we need is to ask for honesty from others about how we can help. I'll tell you one of my personal weaknesses. When I had a staff, one of my challenges is that when I get under a lot of stress, I get short with people. Not really nasty, but just short. I'm not quite as personable. And I don't like that about me. And I'm working hard on that. But I used to tell my staff all the time, I know this about me. Mind you, it's not an excuse to act that way. Some people will say, well, that's the way I am and suck it up and live with it. No, not at all. It's not what I told my staff. I said, I know this about me. And I want you to know it's not personal. And I want you to know that I fully expect you to come to me and say, Ed, you're doing it again. And to their credit, they would. And I would always thank them for it. I would say, thank you. I don't mean to take my stress out on you. I appreciate the gut check. And that would be enough. It was like a rubber band snapping on the wrist or something to say, all right, you need to chill out now. These people are not the cause of your stress. No need to take it out on them. It's a great reality check. Have someone like that in your corner. I can't tell you enough how it has helped me grow as a person to have that in my corner, to have that kind of person around me to say, yeah, check yourself right now. Now, we've hinted around at this throughout the course of our time here, and that's this idea of making your personal growth a priority. Because if you don't make it a priority, nobody else is going to. Maybe some of you have been fully engaged this whole time and you're jotting notes. I really hope you are. Maybe some of you have been tuning in and out. It's hard to sit and listen to a presentation online like this. I understand that. It's not quite the same as being at a conference live. But if we don't make our own personal growth a priority, nobody's going to do it for you. And whether that means that there are things you look to do on your own outside of the workplace, or you go to your boss and say, boss, I'd like to get this certification. I'd like to go to this conference and here's why. I'd like to get a coach. I'd like to get a mentor and why. Okay. If we don't do that, no one else is going to offer it. I do get calls from CEOs and from boards of directors that want to bring me in because they recognize someone needs some personal growth. But more often than not, it's someone coming to them and saying, I need some help. What can you do for me? And you see, it's that kind of person who's going to be the great leader. You want to hear a crazy stat? Experts say that we should spend 10% of our income on our personal development. Now, before you go, holy cow, Ed, just think about it this way, okay? You're at this conference today. Now, I don't know what the cost of this conference is for you, okay? And you're saying, yeah, but my company paid for that. Well, that's what we're talking about. If you're making $50,000 a year, then 10% of that is $5,000. So whether it's a combination of you and listening to books or reading books and buying those, your company sending you to seminars and things like that, about $5,000 a year is what you should be spending on your personal growth, whether that's you personally or some combination of you and your company. Okay. And a lot of people, they tune out when I say that. But there's also that concept of, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell, who said, we need 10,000 hours to master anything. Well, how do you get 10,000 hours? I mean, without spending any kind of money and time for that matter, right? And so again, what is your personal growth plan? Have you ever really thought about it? Have you thought about what's next for you in your career? And not just from a ladder climbing scenario. Have you just thought about what's your next step? What are the things you need to be working on? A couple of years ago for me, I said, I want to do a little more one-on-one coaching with executives. I had been getting asked to do it, and I thought, I'm going to take some courses on how to be a better coach. So I did. And it's helped me be better for my clients on that front. I've been speaking professionally now for, more than a dozen years, probably going back to 2008. And yet I still have a speaking mentor, someone I can go to run things past, to run new ideas past. I'll send him a video of a speaking gig, and I'll say, hey, can you please walk me through things that I need to improve? Heck, he'll probably get this video, okay? How can that be a priority for you? Because when you stagnate, I don't believe from a personal development standpoint, there's a treading water. I think the point at which you stop growing, you actually are regressing. I don't think there's that stagnation. I think you actually regress. And so here's what has to happen. Number one, we have to invest in ourselves first. How can we be a continual learner? What are the things that we need to be doing in order to make ourselves the people we need to be for our people? How do we keep the environment for our people one of a growth environment? Could you start a small book club where you read a little bit of maybe it's a leadership book or a business book every week? You get together at lunch, you talk about it. Could it be something as simple as that? These things don't cost a lot of money, so let's get that 10% of your pay out of the way, right? How do we invest in ourselves to make sure we're learning? I'll tell you one of the ways I invest in me, and it has nothing to do with money. It has to do with time. Here in central Pennsylvania, we get 8 months out of the year, 9 maybe, where we get pretty consistently mild temperatures. The other 3 to 3.5, 4 months, not so much. So for me, oftentimes, it's some time outside during the day. Just take a walk, get away from the computer, get off of my chair, and just take a quick walk around the block, even if it's 5 minutes. Clears my head, allows things that have been percolating in there to start to sift out. I have some of my best ideas when I'm exercising, and I've just totally gotten away from it. If I get writer's block, I get up and I walk. And 9 times out of 10, I come back. That 5-minute walk refreshes me, clears my head, and off I go. So when I talk about investing in yourself, it's not just about money. I don't have dollar signs anywhere on this slide, okay? Sometimes time is all we need to make ourselves better. Because I will guarantee you this, as a leader, if you stop growing, your company will stop growing. It is inevitable. I see it all the time. Because here's what happens. You stop growing, you stop equipping others because you're not learning new skills. And so you figure, well, they're as good as they're going to get, or they see you not learning, so they think, well, if the boss isn't doing anything, I don't have to do anything. Now the whole company stagnates. Huge problem for you when you're trying to grow your organization to better serve your customers. So creating that growth environment, absolutely critical. Now, here's a quick note of what happens when we don't create a growth environment. People quit, and they quit supervisors time and time and time again. In fact, I can tell you with one exception, no, that wasn't even an exception. Every organization I ever left was because of leadership. Every single one of them. For the most part, I enjoyed my job, enjoyed the people I worked with. I no longer bought into the vision. And so I know I'm living testament to this. What most estimates show is that 65% of all people who leave organizations do so because of their boss, their leadership, the lack of vision. And so when we dig into that stat a little bit further, here's what it comes down to. Bosses who devalue them, stop investing in them. Bosses who aren't trustworthy enough to be open and honest with them. And then you get into the incompetent part. That's like one of the worst. But we talked about being insecure a little bit earlier today. This idea that as a leader, we need to be secure in who we are. It's okay to have insecurities, but to be secure enough to lead with passion and purpose and confidence for our people. You see, the problem with these types of people here that devalue and are untrustworthy is that they treat people like objects. They're not truly seeing them as assets to the organization. And forget the saying, people are our most important asset. That's so overused. Do you value your coworkers? Do you tell them how important they are to the organization? Do you hug your people? Figuratively, okay? Figuratively hug your people. You go around hugging people, you're gonna have other problems in the workplace, okay? There's a great book, I love it, on employee relations called Hug Your People, written by a gentleman by the name of Jack Mitchell. He talks about the little things that he does as the owner of his organization to make his people's life better. So there's another gold nugget for you. Go get that book. It's an easy read. I guarantee if you knocked a chapter out at lunch, you'd be done in a week or so. It's an easy read, but so insightful. And so when I finished it, I said to myself, well, there's no rocket science in here. But that was the beauty of it, is that it was simple things. And sometimes, we step over dollars to pick up pennies when it comes to how we want to interact with our people. When all our people really want are the simple things. Now we're in the home stretch here. It's time to pull all of this together and think about how we really need to be a leader worth following. So relationships, absolutely key. You have to work on them. And not just with the people you like and that you enjoy going to happy hour with or whatever. Find the relationships that you're struggling with. My wife noticed something the other day. So I just mentioned a little bit ago that I coach softball, girls softball. There's another coach in the league. We do not get along. And it's on philosophy. I see how he treats his girls. I see how he coaches games. At this age level, I just don't think it's appropriate. My daughter is now playing travel softball, and guess whose daughter made the team as well? So we're sitting this weekend at our first tournament, and afterwards my wife had said, you're such a social butterfly and you're talking to people all the time, but when that guy came over, you were a little bit cold and you didn't really seem like you won. And then I realized who he was. And I said, I know, I should work on that. Okay, I'm sure maybe he's one of these people that's a great person when he's not coaching softball. I've seen, we all know those kind of people, right? That they're a horrible person in one environment, but they're really not a bad person overall. So I need to take responsibility for that relationship. We're going to be hanging out almost one weekend a month for the next year, supporting our girls in tournaments. So need to figure that relationship out. Yeah, you could say, well, that's on the personal side. It doesn't matter. You want to be a good leader, got to take responsibility for relationships. And if we know that people are quitting people, then you need to make time for exit interviews. That's been something that people have said, that's passe. You don't get anything out of it anyway. Maybe you won't, but you definitely won't if you don't try. So try to talk with folks who are leaving your organization to get some good feedback. If you've ever heard of glassdoor.com, check out your organization on glassdoor.com. People will post all kinds of stuff there behind the scenes. Some of it good, some of it not so good. Some of it's good feedback, some of it's worthless feedback, but go check that out. See what people are saying about your organization. Do you truly value your people? Not just in word, not just in slogans, and I'm not talking about bringing them donuts every now and then. Do you truly value them for what they bring to the organization? For what they contribute to getting results for your organization? Because that's what's going to make you credible. If you value them, you hug them, figuratively, you're going to be a credible leader to them. If you're honest with them and you're willing to admit your mistakes and the weaknesses, the things that we've talked about up till now, that's all going to lead to positive emotional health in your organization. And I know we're getting kind of fluffy here, but the good organizations have a great emotional health about them that bleeds out into their culture. You see, today's people want to bring their entire selves to work, especially Gen Z who's coming into the workplace. They want to bring their entire selves in. They don't want to feel like they've got to shield pieces of who they are lest they be judged adversely. That's tough. And the organizations that can figure that out, how to allow people to bring their whole selves in and be their whole selves every day, they're the ones that are going to nail it in the coming years. They're going to attract the absolute best and brightest because they're going to have that wonderful work environment. Now we're just about wrapped up with our time today. And I want to leave you with a couple of more thoughts before we close. Take a look at this quote from Jackie Robinson. Life isn't significant except for its impact on other lives. Amazing insight. Love, love, love that quote. You see, as leaders, this is what it's all about right here. What's the impact we're going to have on other lives? Given the work that all of you are in, you're in a position to not just impact your workers' lives, but those of the people that you serve. Yet you can't have a positive impact and a significant impact on those that you serve if you've not fired up your own team. That's where legacy starts. That's where the best leaders in politics and business and religion and wherever else stand out. That's why books are written about them centuries after they've passed on, because of the impact those people had on other people's lives, not just those close to them, not just on their families, but on other people's lives. Now that's getting pretty existential and pretty out there, but that's what legacy is all about. If you care about the mission of your organization and you truly care about your people, then you'll want to leave that legacy. You see, I was a Boy Scout growing up. And one of the things they taught us from day one was you leave things better than you found them. So if we show up to a campsite and that campsite's in shambles, well, not only are we picking up after ourselves, we're going to pick up after the people that didn't pick up after themselves. We're going to make it better than when we got here. That lesson from childhood has stuck with me, and it's become part of who I am. I truly do. And I don't get to achieve it all the time because I'm human too. But I attempt to leave everything better than I found it. From my family, to my work, to my play, to my relationships. How can I leave them better than when I found them? That to me is influence. That to me is legacy. I'm sure several of you, maybe many of you, sat in my session last year on becoming a person of influence. That is so critical to our success as a leader, being able to influence others, because that's where the impact happens. That's where the significance happens. So, excuse me, my final challenge for you is to look at how you're managing your staff, how you're managing your relationships, and what impact are you having on those folks, for good or bad? And if it's for bad, what do you need to do to fix that? Because that's the true legacy I believe you really want to leave. when you're long gone from your organization. And so get to work on that today. Now, in closing, we've talked about a whole lot of things. We've talked about your personal growth. I appreciate you for making this journey with me today, but don't let it stop today. Too often people come to these conferences and they attend the sessions and they get some good ideas and maybe they take some notes and then they go back and it's business as usual. That's a shame. One final story. My first employer was UPS. And I was a dock worker in college, got promoted to driving, and then got promoted into management. And one of the things they did early on in your management career was they sent you off for 3 weeks of training. You learned everything there was to know about the company. We called it the blood transfusion, out with the red and in with the brown blood, okay? And so I did that. I go away for 3 weeks, away from my family. I come back. I remember the first day I walk in to the building. And the manager says, "Hey, Ed, it's good to have you back. How was the training?" I said, "Oh man, I learned so much stuff," and I'm telling all stuff. You know what he said to me? He looks at me and he smiled across the desk and he says, "Ed, I'm glad to hear that, but welcome back to the real world." You talk about bursting my bubble. I still remember that 25 years later, that there was this idea that, you went off, yeah, you got that training, but you're back in the real world now. Do not allow that to be you. Take what you've learned in this session, the other sessions you're sitting in on, and think about what you can do with the information to make yourself better and to make your organizations better. That's where the return on the money investment, but more importantly, the time investment that you've made is really going to pay dividends. You can find me on all the main social media outlets. I welcome the opportunity to help you be a better leader. And please reach out if I can be of assistance. I thank you so much for your time today. Enjoy the rest of the conference.